So just perhaps a slightly more formal view at the abstraction, at this like very high level of the topics we're trying to discuss, and decide whether they're actually useful to what we're trying to do, or maybe they're just not directly applicable. We just have to turn on our skepticism once in a while, but let's keep looking, right? So abstraction is basically separating properties of entity which are relevant in the context of problem domain. Like I said, another way to interpret this is that sometimes things to be simplified, right? We need to essentially view a certain entity or thing, sort of like in our brain, take it apart and decide which parts we need in software and which parts we can simply ignore or pretend that they're not playing part in what we're doing, and interpolate or simplify or use some mathematical methods to simulate the real thing. But ultimately, we want to represent these entities in software, and if we would be forced to take every single detail of everything that exists in the world, it would perhaps be just impossible to write software. Would be very difficult, right? And this simplification or separation of different properties definitely is taking place in a problem domain, right? Because if you look at different types of applications, the same thing could mean different, could play different roles in different situations. For instance, we can have perhaps different kinds of users and even different kinds of applications. So, for instance, a concept, I think that we have it in one of the slides, but if you think about the concept of a book, right? A book. It could mean different things to a reader of the book, to the publisher, right? To an author of this book. To a recycler, right? And this is all, the book has kind of like different meanings to all of these different parties, right? So if we are trying to build, some kind of recycling system, the processing of the book is or consumption of the book, the process of doing it is absolutely different compared to what the reader does, right? So it's very different. Plus even the book itself can be, a hard copy which is printed, or it can be an electronic book. So different. Those are very different and should be dealt with very differently. Although they could be viewed again from the perspective of different kinds of users with their own agendas. Right? So this is why we always have to make our decisions about things that we have to deal with in the context of a problem domain, in that specific situation that we have to deal with. And that leads us to another consideration, that sometimes when you finished one project and you think that, now I will be able to always succeed in a very similar project. It's yes and no, because it depends how much time you're going to be spending, because if you move one thing that you think you're very well familiar with into a different problem domain, all of a sudden things really change drastically, and you sometimes almost have to start from scratch and not really being able to carry over, parts of your older code and just adopt them very quickly. It may or may not be the case. So, of course, we're trying to solve a specific problem and essentially staying focused on that problem, right? And staying focused and specific actually means that we would like to, for as long as possible, really ignore any sort of like unimportant features that can wait, features that we think could be cool to have, but we have to get disciplined and organized and look at really what is the most important to begin with solving this problem. What we absolutely have to deliver to the user, as opposed to just, we can do a whole list of things. We always have to prioritize and definitely give more attention to things that are absolutely important. All right, so we just went through this example of a book being represented in different domains, and you'll get the idea what that does to the whole situation. So abstraction, again, we're using this word. Right now, an equivalent of an abstraction is perhaps the process of simplifying the real world entity and adopting that entity inside specific software, right, or software solution to that problem. So the process of abstracting, the process of adopting something includes discovering similarities between things, because that leads us to, again, similarities and differences, I would say. Again, look at this, right? So we have a book which is kind of more abstract term than hard copy of the book or electronic book, right? So these are much more specific types of books compared to the book which is abstract, which can be both, which could be in some situations representing both, right? But the similarities or differences kind of have their roots in structure, right? So a set of data that needs to be put together, right? Like the ISBN number, the name of the author, the title of the book, the number of pages, the actual fonts used to print the book, number of illustration, table of contents, you name it. There could be lots of things that could be put in place in our specific problem domain to formulate the structure of it. Operations, right? So we could, with different types of books, we could implement basically a reader that actually reads a book to the reader, and they can listen to it and so forth. Another name for a set of operations is behavior, right? Because the set of operations kind of defines behavior of that thing that we're trying to adopt. So the lack of abstraction, the lack of abstraction could be our own omission, right? So if we misrepresent things, if we make things ineffective, if we just mix up irrelevant things to those entities that we're trying to represent, it kind of leads to a chaotic situation, and is just basically we put ourselves on the wrong track. So which makes us kind of like realize that it is a good idea to start planning, to start thinking, to start designing, perhaps on paper or whiteboard, or write some documentation before attempting to do anything specific, perhaps besides experimentation, which experimentation, the definition of experimentation with software is basically you're experimenting when you're ready to throw away that code. If that experiment is unsuccessful, you will be free to just trash that code and say, well, that didn't work. That experiment was not successful, right? So, which is very different when you're trying to build a real application. You probably don't want to trash it. You want to really be successful and keep building on top of what you already built. So encapsulation here is our next slide.